Okay, so what am I doing? Oh, I'm chasing this guy. No, he's chasing me.
Welcome to Dinner and a Movie with Santino Domani, the channel dedicated to reviving the lost art of establishing real-life, in-person relationships with the one-two combination of delicious homemade cuisine and insightful, engaging, and often righteously indignant film. I'm your conductor, Captain Indignation himself, Santino, and today we'll be brazenly plunging our gloveless hands straight into the septic tank that is the human psyche, in a desperate effort to see if we can't find some gem of an insight into how it has become to identify ourselves, what motivates us, and to what degree our empirical observations, as well as our ability to remember them, shape the two. Christopher Nolan will be the one tempting us to spit in the face of the Almighty by shoving our faces in the ass of existentialism.
I have to believe in a world outside my own mind. I have to believe that my actions still have meaning, even if I can't remember them. I have to believe that when my eyes are closed, the world's still there.
And he'll be doing it through the use of his 2005 film Memento. And while we're enjoying the spectacle of Rene Descartes and Francis Bacon having at each other like the heathen philosophical scholars of old, we'll be putting some delicious stuffed pretzels together. Delicious stuffed pretzels I like to call forget-me-nots. All right then, what are we waiting for? Welcome to Dinner and a Movie with Santino Domani, the channel dedicated to reviving the lost art of establishing real-life, in-person relationships with the one-two combination of delicious, homemade cuisine and insightful, engaging, and often righteously indignant film. I'm your conductor, Captain Indignation himself, Santino, and today we'll be brazenly plunging our gloveless hands straight into the septic tank that is the human psyche, in a desperate effort to see if we can't find some gem of an insight into how it is we come to identify ourselves, what motivates us, and to what degree our empirical observations, as well as our ability to remember them, shape the two. Christopher Nolan will be the one tempting us to spit in the face of the Almighty by shoving our noses in the ass of existentialism.
I have to believe in a world outside my own mind. I have to believe that my actions still have meaning, even if I can't remember them. I have to believe that when my eyes are closed, the world's still there.
And he'll be doing it through the use of his 2005 film Memento. And while we're enjoying the spectacle of Rene Descartes and Francis Bacon having at each other like the heathen philosophical scholars of old, we'll be putting some delicious stuffed pretzels together. Delicious stuffed pretzels I like to call forget-me-nots. All right then, what are we waiting for? Welcome to Dinner and a... I finally made it. How long have I been cooking?
I'm Leonard Shelby. I'm from San Francisco.
That's who you were. That's not what you become.
Shut your mouth.
You want to know, Lenny? Come on. Come on, let's go down to the basement. Let's go down, you and me together. Then you'll know who you really are.
Thanks, Lenny. And while it may be true that that's who he was, and in fact who he still maintains he is, the audience watching Memento is going to go on a backwards journey to discover what it is he's actually become, regardless of whether or not he's capable of remembering it. But what makes this particular film unique, and for many impatient film critics absolutely insufferable, is the structure in which Christopher Nolan chooses to unveil the plot, which is with the second half of the plot being unveiled starting from the end and working its way backwards towards the beginning, and the first half of the plot being told chronologically as it's spliced intermittently throughout the backwards running second half of the plot.
You got me? You paying attention?
No. Sorry, man.
And if that sounds confusing, don't worry. It's actually a total fucking nightmare. A justifiable nightmare, however, that I'll happily take the time to defend later on in the analysis. But a nightmare nonetheless. The film follows Lenny in his attempt to seek revenge upon the mysterious John G., the man responsible for not only raping and murdering his wife, but also for slamming his head into a bathroom mirror, effectively leaving him with the mental faculties of a progressive blue checkmark on Twitter. That is, unable to remember anything if it happened more than 10 to 20 minutes ago, completely incapable of evaluating any given situation within its proper context, and because of the obvious inconsistencies in his motivations and values, is often manipulated and openly mocked by those around him, but lacks the wherewithal to understand that it's even happening. And while it may be tempting to insist that someone so inept, dysfunctional, and disconnected from their environment can't possibly exist in reality,
let's put a stop to that rumor right now.
The internet assures me that Twitter does indeed exist, and there are recorded cases of what's called anterograde amnesia on the record. So, Lenny attempts to take on the Herculean task of playing detective by finding John G. by writing endless disjointed notes, taking pictures and labeling them with the new knowledge he's just acquired about the subject in the picture, and even going so far as to tattoo important facts about the case strategically around his body in order to eternally inform himself about not only the progress that he's made in achieving his goal, but also to inform him that he's even pursuing a goal at all in the first place. And as he ambles about the best he can trying to make progress, we see more and more how his endeavors are impacting the lives of those around him who somehow find themselves tangled in the web of his chaotic and tragic story. Needless to say, we'll come to find out that there's more to them, the overall story, and to Leonard Shelby himself than we might have presupposed without the context behind it all, which is thinly ladled out strategically throughout the duration of the film. Christopher Nolan's film Memento is based on a short story his brother had written for GQ magazine back in 2001 called Memento Mori, which when translated literally from Latin means remember to die, or in other words, remember that you have to die. And as it's historically pertained to the world of art and literature, it's effectively some material object that serves as an abysmal and ostentatious reminder of the universal certainty of impending destruction, like, say, a polished skull or a tattoo on the lower back. Jonathan Nolan's story is a real joy to read. It's more straightforward and concise than its cinematic counterpart, which is not to say that this necessarily makes it a better piece of work in general, but it touches on the same themes that make the film so compelling in the first place, which, in my opinion, can only be accomplished through print. And if you have an extra half hour or so and care to listen to it narrated by the author himself, I'll go ahead and post a link in the description where you can listen to it. Dude, no promo, by the way. And I highly recommend that you do. I hope you get as much out of it as I did, which was a lot. So having said that, yes, the film is extremely difficult to follow, especially if it's your first go at it. I think even by the most generous standards, depicting it as convoluted is one hell of an understatement. But before I go charging into how the film is all the better for it, let me first say with the utmost sincerity and with zero hyperbole that there is little that I despise more than a film or a novel or poem or painting or any other piece of artistic craft that is purposefully unintelligible and incoherent because the filmmaker knows that if the audience feels like the film has gone over their head, they'll hesitate to speak up for fear of looking unsophisticated. Take this gem here, for example. And so when asked, hey David, why did you throw that salad of chaos, distraction, and incoherence at me? What is it exactly you're trying to say? Then they try and get away with machine gunning horse shit like this across the audience.
it's up to the people then, to, find their own, interpretation. It doesn't really matter what I think.
You can explain something about the bluebirds, because some people don't really understand it. Not too much.
No, I won't explain it. But I think it's going to be a different explanation for, different people.
I know you hate saying what things mean in your films, but am I right in thinking that that's at least in the right area?
No.
So no definition of Lynchian from David Lynch?
No. I really would like to be able to explain, but the film ends up being the explanation. That's what's so terrible about press conferences. It's all about the film, not about the words.
Either that, or they stick their entitled noses up in the air and insist their work is simply too good and too insightful to be appreciated by the likes of the plebeians they're hoping will pay to see it. And more often than not, they're sure to make it clear just how little respect for their craft they have, how proud they are at how little effort they put into becoming good at it, and scoffing at the dedicated pioneers that came before them and even made it possible for them to prey upon the impressionable, the ignorant, and the cripplingly shallow by calling them simple, boring dinosaurs of the past.
I'm not into musicianship at all. I don't have any respect for it. I just hate it. To learn how to read music or to understand arpeggios and Dorian modes and all that stuff is just a waste of time. It gets in the way of originality.
Imagine, for example, a 5-year-old kid who wants to be good at playing the piano, but after realizing that being good means countless hours of practice, hard work, study, and delaying instant gratification in order to achieve it, he simply changes the definition of what it means to be a talented piano player to include people who smear chocolate pudding all over the sheet music, that is, the sheet music that he can't read, and chaotically smashing the keys with the palm of his hand in no discernible order whatsoever. And there you have it, the current state of cinematic affairs, brought to you by the entitled, finger-sniffing, fuck-witted, morally corrupt progressive ghouls infesting Hollywood.
Our next presenter starred in Netflix's Bird Box, a movie where people survive by acting like they don't see a thing. Sort of like working for Harvey Weinstein. You did it. I didn't. You did it. Shut the fuck up.
I'm not going to take a pile of shit, hurl it against the wall, then demand my audience explain what it means to me. And when their explanations don't hail my quote-unquote work as anything less than transplendent, or if they persist on asking questions that demand I defend my work with any sort of consistency, I lambaste them as dim-witted, uncultured naifs not worthy of an explanation that I don't even actually fucking have. Imagine the cheek on these entitled, talentless bourgeoisies. Defend your work, you postmodern, gutless, pie-slinging snake oil salesman.
Oh, that's all right. I laugh myself sometimes. Ain't a whole lot else you can do.
Because if you won't, or more likely you can't, I, as should everybody else, will assume that you have nothing even remotely compelling or insightful to say, that you've never had an original, interesting, or introspective thought in that big empty head of yours, and if, on the off chance, you found a degree of success in whatever capacity, it's only because you figured out how to exploit people's inherent fear of being ostracized and outcast from social circles because they're not up to date with whatever soulless, esoteric, meaningless crap that's currently being popularized by Starbucks or Disney. I apologize for the off-topic tirade, but I can't emphasize enough how much I loathe this stupid art grift and how much of a cancer it is on a society. The notion of universal relativism, that is, the idea that since a concept or a person or place or event can't be experienced in the exact same way between any two individuals, is sufficient grounds to come to the ham-fisted philosophical conclusion that no objective truth can be observed within reality at all, by anyone, has effectively served as the springboard for the implementation of the most devastating social policies in human history. And the reason people fall for this garbage as much as they do is because it offers to liberate them from having to take responsibility for their actions, as well as from the unpleasant but all too necessary burden of reflecting upon questions like, is my unhappiness somehow the result of my own personal shortcomings or failures? Or is there anything I can do to make sure this outcome I didn't like doesn't happen again in the future? And it's also how we get such incoherent blatherings like, silence is no longer simply just silence. Silence Silence is now in fact violence, or trust the science no longer means trust the inductive reasoning process, but rather trust your social superiors who claim that they are the science, which, as far as I'm concerned, is the most egregious logical fallacy any Redditor can commit, the dreaded appeal to authority. Now, this isn't to say that I consider myself to be the sole arbiter of what does and what does not constitute good art, but there is a relatively straightforward metric that I like to reference whenever I find myself arguing with a Johnny Welfare or his well-traveled UC-educated walking pile of Munchausen syndrome of an old lady about how there's no such thing as objectively bad art and reality is whatever you want it to be. And this defense against the deliberate perversion against truth and beauty is what I like to call the Frankfurt Feculence test, or the 4 E's of meaningful art. 1. Is it engaging or entertaining? This point is almost certainly the most straightforward, but admittedly subjective of the 4. And while it's certainly true that not everyone is going to find the same film equally engaging or engaging at all, for that matter, it's also true that some movies are just generally more popular than others. And I think that we can all at least agree that if the point of art is, at the very least, to be experienced to some degree and contemplated on some level, it would be reasonable to assume that art cannot be good art or effective if nobody can actually stand to experience it in the first place. 2. Is it enlightening? Does it say something new or thought-provoking about who we are, or where we've come from, where we're going, or a place within reality in general? 3. Is it earned? Is it the product of skill, experience, and legitimate effort? And last but most importantly, 4. Can the creator explain or expand upon themes, symbols, methods, and meanings in a logically consistent way that their intended audience can understand? As human beings, making sense of things has evolved within us as a matter of self-preservation. Finding patterns and learning to recognize them in order to make predictions that help us avoid danger or keep our lives balanced is what's essentially removed human beings from the food chain.
Don't kid yourself, Jimmy. If a cow ever got the chance, he'd eat you and everyone you care about.
So naturally, when something makes no sense, we become compelled by it. That's why when someone comes up to you and says something like, "I have to tell you something," then you say, "What?" And then they respond, "Oh, never mind." Your natural compulsion is to rip the nose off of their stupid fucking face with a rusty set of pliers. Movies are certainly no exception. A film that is chaotic and confusing is naturally compelling because we want to make sense of it. And since most of us are silly enough to assume that someone might actually want to take some pride in creating something meant to convey a message that actually conveys a fucking message, a chaotic and convoluted film with no readily discernible message or resolution often keeps us scratching our heads long after we've left the theater. And if the creator is unwilling or unable to make the connection between the madness and the message, because more than likely there is no message behind the madness, people naturally hesitate to come forward and lament that the film makes no sense or demand an explanation from the creator. Hans Christian Andersen details this human phenomenon here in a way that even a fat, lazy, child-molesting stain on society with the intellectual sophistication of a 3-year-old and a philosophical outlook that depicts thievery as a social virtue can understand. But unfortunately for all of us, the aspiring leeches and champagne socialists of Marx's greasy ilk who walk so comfortably among us don't like to read all that much, unless, of course, it's something that serves to affirm their pre-existing biases. Most importantly, their place in society is the most well-fed, comfortable, readily entertained, least encumbered, alcohol and drug-consuming, sexually promiscuous, literate, well-educated, well-traveled, and well-medicated victims in all of human history. Now, don't get me wrong, though. Something created that hasn't checked every box can still be very good. Die Hard, for example, is good.
I was always kind of partial to Roy Rogers, actually. I really like those sequin shirts.
It's certainly engaging anyway, but the film isn't exactly what I would consider to be good art.
Go fuck yourself.
Good entertainment? Absolutely. But there's no honor lost for being honest about that. Good entertainment certainly has its place. But to my original point, don't be afraid to be skeptical of films that don't seem to make much sense because they look pretentious, which was exactly my sentiment after having watched Memento for the first time. I dismissed it almost reflexively. My budding hatred for the growing prominence of postmodernism, critical theory, communism, and progressive politics in general seemed to me to be accelerating quite rapidly the more I studied film, history, and philosophy. I was wise to the grift and becoming perpetually repulsed by its presence in cinema, a subject I loved and aspired to work hard to be good at for as long as I could possibly remember. I'm thankful to a friend of mine, a very well-studied and brilliant writer, director, and university film professor, who understood why I would be quick to disregard the film, but insisted that I had this one, backwards. And after he'd made it clear that Nolan had been quite vocal about defending his work, making it understood that the complex way in which he chose to lay out the story is critical for creating an atmosphere that places an emphasis on the theme. That is, the theme he goes on to explain. You know, like someone who's proud of his work and, fuck all, wants people to understand it because he thinks it's good. Point is, difficult and complex though it may be, Nolan actually takes the time and makes the effort to explain the meaning behind the film. I'll go ahead and post a link in the comments to an interview where he explains the timeline and the intended meaning behind the film. If you walk away from your first viewing experience feeling disjointed and unsatisfied, which I can almost guarantee you that you will, I would encourage you to watch the interview and then take another crack at the film, which is exactly what I did, and, well, I'm glad I did. I found that on the second go-around, I was more motivated to pause the film often and try and think critically about what it was I was supposed to understand about what was going on, or perhaps more to the point, what I was supposed to understand at the particular moment in the story. So, what's so great about Memento? At the risk of sounding like an insufferable twat, I have to say that one of the biggest reasons that I love this film is because of its subtle but deeply introspective philosophical undertones, like exploring the notion of induction being a fundamentally flawed way for human beings to understand the reality because of our universal predispositions to bias.
So you lie to yourself to be happy. There's nothing wrong with that. We all do it. Who cares if there's a few little details you'd rather not remember?
Which is a position I can sympathize with. Some things I just don't want to know because the truth will invariably be far less amusing than the asinine story I've stitched together in my irreverent childish mind. Take Boxing Day in Canada, for example. I don't want to know what actually happens on Boxing Day because I'm happy thinking that every year, the day after Christmas, every last man, woman, and child, old, infirmed, and enfeebled alike, in every last town in Canada wakes up, puts on a flashy robe, laces up a pair of 16-ounce gloves, then starts pairing off by age and weight class, and beating the shit out of each other, until one person within each demographic ultimately stands victorious and is crowned Wayne Gretzky of Boxing Day, whereby they receive the ceremonial Boxing Day ham, a brand new denim wardrobe.
You look like the president, chairman, and CEO of Levi Strauss. Where'd you get the Canadian tuxedo?
And can never be compelled to serve jury duty again. I was surprised to come to understand that Memento has quite a bit to say about some of the reasons that it originally turned me off to the film in the first place, like bias and importance of context and the eternal struggle humanity is ultimately plagued with in trying to perceive and interpret his realities so that he can better understand his place within it. As the film progresses, we're introduced to peripheral characters whose lives are impacted dramatically by Lenny's actions, and as we come to find out to what degree exactly this impact is had on them, the fact that Lenny has no recollection of them at all, and therefore can't put subsequent interactions with them into context, makes these relationships and interactions increasingly disturbing.
I can talk about whoever the fuck I want. I can say whatever I want and you won't remember. I could call your wife a fucking whore and we can still be friends.
Calm down.
Easy for you to say. You can't get scared. You don't know how, you fucking idiot.
Take it easy. This has nothing to do with me.
Well, maybe it does. How the fuck would you know? You don't know a fucking thing.
Not only as the film progresses, but also as the plot regresses, and we're able to put events that have yet to occur in their proper context. One small example I can think of to illustrate this point without giving too much away is that of the laceration on Lenny's left cheek, that as the film progresses, and therefore we move incrementally closer to understanding its origins, it becomes increasingly fresher and fresher until the incident and where it comes to be unfolds. And it's another clue on top of many, many others. The car, the money, the gun, the scribbles, and the mysterious redactions on Lenny's notes, which over time come to reveal their origins and construct an overarching picture of his world that is a lifetime away from where we quote-unquote started at the outset of the film. And it serves as an unsettling reminder for some, and as a shocking revelation for others, that while it's true that your actions and inactions will always have consequences and meaning, if you lack the ability to remember them, they can only have consequences for you. Consequences which you can never hope to learn from, but they'll still have consequences and meaning for those around you. Well, like I'd mentioned before, the timeline is a corker, and I think I'd be doing you a great disservice if I didn't insist that if this is your first viewing, you should come prepared to be baffled. And I'm going to even go so far as to say that the majority of people are going to walk away from the experience feeling lost and unsatisfied. And to those people, I would say this. Take the time to watch the interview I posted in the link below, where Nolan takes the time to elaborate on his work in Memento, and then have another go at it for fun's sake. I can all but guarantee that you're going to come away from that second viewing with a different take, and it's going to be a significantly better one. Another gripe I have, albeit a somewhat pedantic one I suppose, is the confidence with which Lenny has explaining his condition to people, despite the fact that, for his part, this is the first time he's realizing that he has it. Sure, he's very well familiar with the condition because of his experience with Sammy Jenkins before the assault, but shouldn't every new awakening come with the new and horrifying knowledge that he, all of a sudden, has the condition?
I guess I've already told you about my condition.
Oh, well, only every time I see you.
I mean, shouldn't this revelation be a little bit more dramatic for our poor Lenny? Because he appears to shoulder it like a man who's been dealing with it for quite some time. Or perhaps this observation is a misstep on the part of your humble narrator about what impact conditioning, or from my friends in the psychological community called procedural memory, has on a person's perception, a point which is subtly interlaced throughout the film.
You sure?
Doing my best to take care not to spoil the film, it's important to understand that it's Leonard's inability to interact with peripheral characters or make decisions within a proper context is the reason why many of his ordeals come to manifest in the first place, and is ultimately responsible for him becoming the man he eventually reveals himself to be. And that something turns out to be very alien to the audience, who first came to know him an hour and a half earlier as a vulnerable, clueless individual. And it's for this exact reason why we live in a society where two factions of people seem to exist in two completely different realities, which may not inherently be the aim of political philosophies like relativism or critical theory, but it's most certainly been the outcome whenever it's been implemented throughout human history. Without context, without a history or proper perspective, heroes quickly become villains. Villains turn into victims. Injecting disinfecting light becomes drinking disinfecting bleach. Loving mothers turn into distant silhouettes. A man becomes a woman. A preference becomes a predisposition. One violent riot becomes a peaceful protest, and another becomes a senseless insurrection. It turns brave warriors into remorseless conquerors, and logic and reason into amorphous political ornaments entirely subservient to the honks and whistles of whichever amnesiac bureaucrat is currently defiling them. War is peace, freedom is slavery, ignorance is strength, and so on, until one day we come to a headline from one of our favorite political rags, which is so hard to believe that it simply must be true. We find the courage from somewhere deep in the grottos of our humanity to ask the question, why? If this is the truth, if this does in fact fall in line with reality, what can it successfully predict? What has it successfully predicted? How can we test it? What problems has it consistently solved? Someone in a padded room somewhere in upstate New York, or a tenured professor from an Ivy League school,
What's the difference?
may believe 2 + 2 = 5, but nobody's ever successfully built a bridge, cured a disease, or fed a hungry community, having worked under the conviction that it did. The relativist is convinced that both perspectives have value, and herein lies the problem with valuing empathy over objectivity. That is, their feelings over everyone's reality, including theirs. To place value in the wrong belief that 2 + 2 = 5 is the opposite of compassion. It's a condemnation to a life of chaos, perpetual failure, and endless suffering. And it is the opinion of your humble narrator that the sooner we all start questioning the answers that come back to us when we ask why, the sooner the philosophical saboteur of relativism dies the slow, painful death within decent society that it deserves. It's for this reason that I think Memento is not only a brilliant, introspective film, it's also one of those rare films that really is, well, quite literally timeless. So I encourage you to give it a watch.
Test this, you fucking quack.
And then another, and another, and another. But before you do, I'll go and exchange another small piece of my dignity from my rapidly dwindling reserve in the hopes that I can start greasing YouTube's algorithm to work in my favor, and ask, if you liked what I had to say, don't forget to give the like and subscribe buttons a tickle. If you agreed with what I had to say, or if you think I'm completely full of shit, go ahead and let me know in the comments section, and I'll be happy to thank you or fight you, either way, and not necessarily in that order. Also, if you have something disparaging or mean-spirited to say about the Irish or Karl Marx, feel free to let my comments section serve as the canvas for the colorful strokes of your righteous indignation. Thanks for tuning in, and I hope to see you again, but until that day, this is Santino Domani saying, take care of yourself, and if you can, take care of someone else. Dick saucer, remember? Remember saucy goodness.